right. Okay, shall we? All right. Thumbs up for Mr. Producer Man. Welcome, everyone, to episode 3 of This Week is Live. I'm your host, Raymond Flotat of MXDWN.com. So glad to see you well. This week, we have a bevy of headlines for you and an interesting little story that I like to call Bizarre Comparison. First up, first and foremost, big news story of the week, Taylor Hawkins' tribute concert in Los Angeles. Now, just 2 weeks ago, there was an equivalent event in London, large repository of Foo Fighters fans over in the UK. But here at the Forum in Los Angeles, there was a massive event of absolutely epic proportions. Quite frankly, for anyone who's a rock and roll fan or a classic rock fan, this might be one of the most legendary concerts of the last 10 years. Included in this show, not the least of which, including Joan Jett and Taylor Hawkins' side bands, Chevy Metal and the Coattail Riders, were special guests from almost every corner of Taylor Hawkins' life, career, friends, and influences that led to his career as a drummer for the Foo Fighters. Amidst them, Mark Ronson, famed producer, Them Crooked Vultures, which features Josh Homme from Queens of the Stone Age, and, of course, John Paul Jones of Led Zeppelin fame, Wolfgang Van Halen, son of the legendary and late Eddie Van Halen, along with Justin Hawkins from The Darkness covering a couple of Van Halen songs, the two main members of Def Leppard, along with even Miley Cyrus doing a version of Autograph, Nikki Sixx and Tommy Lee doing a couple of Motley Crue songs, Elliot Easton and Josh Homme doing a couple of Cars songs, Taylor Hawkins being a big fan of the Cars, Pink, along with Nancy Wilson of Heart, doing a rendition of Barracuda, Stuart Copeland of The Police, Alanis Morissette, who a lot of people might not know, Taylor Hawkins was an early drummer in her band in the original era of Jagged Little Pill, Sebastian Bach, Geezer Butler, and Lars Ulrich doing a couple of Black Sabbath cover songs, Supernaut and Paranoid, Geddy Lee and Alex Lifeson ostensibly doing a mini Rush set, playing a part of 2112, Working Man, their legendary early career song, and YYZ. Later on, not to be outdone, Matt Cameron and Kim Thale from Soundgarden joined Pat Smear, Chris Novoselic, and Dave Grohl, along with Taylor Momsen from The Pretty Reckless, doing a couple of Soundgarden covers, The Day I Tried to Live, and also Black Hole Sun. Brian May and Roger Taylor from Queen more or less ended the special guest portion of the evening doing a bevy of 5 Queen cover songs, including Pink on Somebody to Love, and then ending with Brian May solo, just on guitar, doing an incredible rendition most people would familiarize more with the late Freddie Mercury of Love of My Life. After that, there was even a moment where Dave Chappelle came out and surprisingly did a pretty good job doing a cover of Radiohead's Creep along with the Foo Fighters, and then a who's who of famous drummers, Josh Freese, John Theodore, usually from the Mars Volta, Travis Barker of Blink-182, Brad Wilk of Rage Against the Machine, Patrick Wilson of Weezer, Chad Smith from the Red Hot Chili Peppers, Omar Hakim, and then last but not least, Taylor Hawkins' own son, Oliver Shane Hawkins. Rest in peace, Taylor Hawkins. In other news, in the world of games, the Electronic Entertainment Industry Expo is going to return in 2023. This is after, in the last few years, because of the pandemic of COVID-19, the event was ostensibly canceled in one formulation 2 years ago, existing only as a live stream event, but then last year canceled completely. This year, wisely learning from the example set by Summer Game Fest in 2022, E3 is going to return both as a business and press event, but also a public game event. So what this means is the first couple of days between June 13th and June 15th, 2023, E3 will be only for members of the video game making business and members of the press to have hands-on exclusives, to attempt to play games well before their release in preparation for their coverage. And then in a different hall in the convention center from 6/15, 2022 through 6/16, the event will be a different event meant entirely for the public, giving fans a chance comparably to be able to talk with developers, but also play games long before they're ever actually released. In other sad news, 90s rapper and very famous for his time, Coolio, passed away yesterday on September 28th. Now, there was a call in Los Angeles to the local fire department. They responded on the scene. He was found unresponsive, and paramedics attempted to revive him for 45 minutes unsuccessfully. He was pronounced dead at the scene. At the time of this recording, there is no news as to what the cause of death was. In happier news, in the world of movies, it was announced by Ryan Reynolds via social media that not only would his Deadpool 3 sequel continue on, but that also Hugh Jackman would return to play Wolverine for the first time since Logan, where the character was apparently, spoiler alert, killed off. There wasn't much detail to be had as to the plot, the point, the purpose, how and why Wolverine is even alive, and Hugh Jackman and Ryan Reynolds in social media made numerous jokes about that fact, but at least for this time, the movie will be released 9/6/2024. That's September 6th, 2024, directed by Sean Levy, who also directed Ryan Reynolds' recent movie, Free Guy. Lastly, the first official trailer of HBO's rendition of the famed survival horror video game, The Last of Us, came out. Now, in 100 seconds worth of footage, there wasn't much in the way of dialogue, but the TV show showed much of the gripping, brutal realism and emotional storytelling that the video game has always been famous for. So, in this footage, you see dystopic shots of the world gone mad, shots of the actual fall when the quote-unquote zombie apocalypse actually takes place, and to that end, also the footage of how Joel, played by Pedro Pascal from The Mandalorian, and Ellie, played by Bella Ramsey, meet, slowly start to form a bond, and ultimately become a part of a father-daughter relationship as they attempt to forward across the country in the midst of the inhospitable outbreak that they're all dealing with. Now, for today's story, we're going to talk about two very different things. We're going to continue essentially making connection between them. I want to start by mentioning something that was a very exciting and fun thing for me when I was young. And this kind of might be a little bit of maybe not popular with everyone as far as the topic is concerned. I find that a lot of people, they're either gamers or they're not gamers. And some people really live for the world of video games. Some people really live for not really playing video games, being a part of other media. So I'm going to make a bizarre comparison here today in terms of connecting something from the world of video games to the world of music. Now, in 1994, Nintendo released what is widely regarded, if you're not a gamer already, one of the best video games ever made. It was called Super Metroid. Super Metroid was the third installment of a series of side-scrolling platformer games that originated with the Nintendo Entertainment System called Metroid. Metroid, quite famously, is the first real example of a female lead character in the game known by Samus Aran. Now, in most of the footage of Metroid, in the first one and its Game Boy sequel, and then, of course, in Super Metroid, it's not really heavily advertised who Samus Aran is or what her gender is, or that it even matters. And this is pretty groundbreaking for its time. The original Nintendo Entertainment System version, you had to know an exact, precise way to finish the game to even learn that fact that Samus Aran was a woman. And what's pretty wonderful about this particular game is, on top of its brilliant level design, its brilliant colors design, boss fights, everything that made for such a wonderful game in its time, is that it's not an over-sexualized depiction of a woman in a video game. Ultimately, this game is the perfection of that art form at the time. Now, Super Metroid is a pretty wonderful example of what was possible in the world of games in this moment, because it was a game that came basically with almost no direction as to what was going to happen, what everything meant, and how you needed to play the game to experience it. I mean, every Metroid game is ostensibly the same. Samus Aran goes somewhere. There's some kind of outbreak of this vicious alien species called the Metroids, kind of like a brain-sucking amoeba, for lack of a better term. And while typically a bounty hunter, Samus Aran ends up being the only one that can save whatever distant outpost or asteroid or planet that the Metroids have infested. So Super Metroid for the SNES in 1984 was no different. Samus Aran escapes some kind of base where the Metroids are being experimented on, heads to another planet, and then ultimately has to fight her way through and figure things out. The real genius of Super Metroid is the fact that ultimately you're never really told what's going to happen. You're never really told what you need to do, but every step of the way, the game is teaching you something. The brilliance in how it was put together is that everything you see becomes another expansion of what you need to do, what you need to explore, and ultimately how you need to navigate everything. Every next level teaches you a little bit more. Every next boss fight shows you another trick. And then little by little, where you went from the beginning of not having any clue what you're doing, by the time that you get to the end, you basically are a master of this world. It's never so easy that it's pathetically simple. It's never so hard that it's ultimately too challenging to experience. Now, the further you go, the more empowering this feels. And of course, there's some measure of a story that's laced in there where there's like a baby Metroid and you save it and that it ends up saving you as the story comes to its conclusion. But ultimately, it's revered amidst gamers as being one of the best games that's ever been made in the history of the entire medium of video games. Now, that may have changed in the last couple of years with some of the modern cinematics, including The Last of Us, which we just mentioned, made for the Sony PlayStation. But effectively, in its time, nobody had really experienced something as well balanced as this, as fun to play, as evocative, as educational in its own weird way, as it helped you feel special as you learned and you grew through the story. It was a wonderful thing that even in 1994, you could pretty much live inside for weeks on end because it was so rewarding and it was so fun and it was so intriguing and it was so smart and it wasn't as frustrating as so many video games before and since end up being and what they require of you, demand of you. This felt like an experience where you were being grown as you did it. Now, ultimately, I'm going to make a very bizarre comparison here. And I'm going to talk about one of my favorite concert experiences that I ever had in my life. And this happened at Coachella in the year 2006. Now, for those of you that might be new to Mixdown or my work or my writing, there was a long period of time where going to Coachella every year was basically the centerpiece of my year. It was essentially everything that I looked forward to. And I would be the person who was there at noon at the very beginning of each day in the 100-degree sun and would be there till 1 a.m. until the very last band finished. And ultimately, it was everything that I kind of wanted out of a music experience. Now, in those early years of Coachella, the booking, the lineup, the bands was evocative of the counterculture world that I think a lot of people like me came from. And that effectively was kind of everything that was happening below the surface that wasn't top 40 that was brilliant. This is why you had years where Blur was headlining, or Radiohead was headlining, or Rage Against the Machine was headlining, or you might have somebody like Portishead headlining. Well, in 2006, even though they weren't stated as the headliner, Daft Punk was pretty much the performance that year that everybody was talking about. Now, as a historical footnote, Coachella 2006 came around in the year before Daft Punk had released their... Start recording, though. Yeah, I'm going to just study my notes for a second, and then we'll get it to turn on the stream, and we'll get into it. Come join us at https://twitch.tv/MXDWN. Tweet. Tweetly tweet tweet. Okay. Profile. Did that tweet? Yep, that did. Okay. All right, so I'm gonna get my headphones on. You can put it streaming. I'm just gonna study my notes for a minute, and then I'll let you know when I'm officially gonna begin. So I'll just give people a minute to filter in. Okay, cool. And just so I know, if I want a little less in the headphones, which thing is that on the board? That right there? Okay. Yeah, so a little higher. Oh, well, a lot higher. That's almost nothing. Higher, higher, right there. Yeah, perfect. Thank you. Okay, one moment. Can hear this flapping. Oh my God, it's amazing. Okay. Okay. Let me just study a little bit here. Effectively, as they went into it, it started with just the smallest of tones. They started bringing in small pieces of their songs. And the further you went, more and more pieces of the pyramid began to light up. More and more aspects of it became visible. That you found that the pyramid's triangles along the edges of the pyramid could light up in different colored patterns, that the back wall behind them was capable of words and animations, that there were two different grids on either side of the pyramid that could be synchronized and lit up. And little by little, as they went, the whole set became like this epic, giant remix album, combining and recombining all of their different songs, all of their different albums in these incredible concoctions, including, of course, not to be outdone, their smash hit single Around the World, which kind of became this epic 15-minute mix and remix of the song, jumping back in and jumping back out. As the show went on, people went from this kind of understated excitement to this overblown, orgiastic excitement where you basically felt the whole crowd basically losing their mind. Now, that thing you hear about where people talk about there being an electricity in the air when a band's about to take the stage, this was one of those kinds of shows. No one really knew what was going to happen. And then all of a sudden, little by little, here's this piece of a pyramid, and then another piece of a pyramid, and then another piece in the pyramid. And the further that this show went, Daft Punk, much like Super Metroid as a video game, began teaching the audience what they were going to do and how they were going to use these tools that they had created for themselves to show them things. Unlike Super Metroid, of course, the audience was not in control. The audience wasn't able to control what was going to happen or what they were going to experience, but it did create a certain anticipatory feeling of what was going to be possible. And the further that went, the more these little elements got ladled in to the performance in terms of the visual display. Ultimately, the more impressive it became, the more rewarding of an experience it became. I've never seen anything like it in my life, and I don't know that I ever will again. I've seen a lot of concerts in my life, running an entertainment magazine for 20 years, but this one, in my lifetime at least, takes the prize. And the further that it went, the happier and more satisfied the audience was. If I remember correctly, and it's been quite a long time since 2006 now, but if I remember correctly, in its finale, some 80 minutes later, ultimately, people stood and cheered for 10, 15 minutes straight. There wasn't really an encore. It ended with, of course, the title track of their recent album, Human After All, and all the different elements that they had been little by little doling out, and all the little elements that they had been taking and basically spooling out and explaining to people. All of that came together in one explosion of color. And of course, Daft Punk's metaphor in a very Close Encounters of the Third Kind of way, which was the opening notes of the show. Hey, we're aliens from another planet. We're robots from another place. And we're here to bring you the gift of music to Earth. Human After All became this essentially epic display of that, as weird and out there as they were just like all the rest of us. And the adorned video walls were all images of every kind of person worldwide in different points of happiness and joy and dance and celebration. It was a show like no other. And for anyone who's followed EDM music in the last 10 years, this is why the EDM band headlining the festival had an incredible, epic, probably unnecessary visual array in terms of what was displayed. Because once people saw what was possible and how it wasn't just a couple guys pressing buttons or somebody behind a turntable, and it became this entire holistic experience, the more impressive that it became for everyone, and the more that it was what everyone thought they needed in terms of making a great show for music, for festivals, for experiences. This was that moment. And of course, for the next 5 years, if you went to a concert where there was a DJ, or if you went to a festival where there was a DJ, there was going to be at least 2 Daft Punk songs that were dropped in. This was that moment. I remember quite vividly in its aftermath, there was a writer from Mixdown who just happened to be at Coachella at the same time. And when I found him back at the campsite where we were staying, I, in complete shock, looked at him and said, "Did you see it? Did you see it?" Like Kurt Cobain had risen from the grave or something, or aliens had really arrived on Earth. And his immediate response was, it was okay. He ended up regretting that standpoint, and some years later told me, okay, yeah, it was really special, and I was in a bad mood that day. But nothing has ever really moved me quite the way that I saw there. And it was a kind of an anomaly because not a lot of people got to see that tour. They played around the world and around America once, and then that was basically it. They released a couple things here. They produced a couple things with Kanye West there. And then unceremoniously in 2020 during the pandemic, they just announced they were done. They were breaking up. And it's impressive to me in their own way, just like Super Metroid did in its own fashion in 1994. They basically taught the entire music-loving world something about how special something could be, how it could feel, how you could bring people into the experience, how you could reward them. And through such minimal, compared to the amount that most bands are on the road in this day and age, compared to how much you'll find bands everywhere in your face and syncs and licensing and movies, it's incredible to think how much they shape things. I don't want to make a comparison to, say, the Velvet Underground because they're a very different kind of band. But in that same respect, the Velvet Underground are legendary because anybody who ever had any interface with them ultimately never thought again the same about how music could be made. And I think Daft Punk became kind of that pace car for so much of the music, and of course, not the least of which, especially electronic music. That's it for this week. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll see you again next week and every week thereafter on This Week is Live.